Hello, good friends. Welcome back to the Bill Press Pod. Well, we begin this week with two more examples of Donald Trump pushing to expand his presidential powers. First, he insists on the power to send the military into any American city he wants for any reason he invents. And so, blocked by a judge from sending first any Oregon National Guard into Portland, Oregon, and then any California National Guard, and then any National Guard from any state, he sent the National Guard instead to Chicago. Second, having done nothing to prevent a government shutdown, he now insists that a shutdown gives him the absolute power to fire any federal employee he wants, thousands of them, for no reason at all, simply because they work for what he considers to be left-leaning federal agencies. Yep, in just 8 months, has Donald Trump already succeeded in redefining the presidency? Has any president ever attempted to amass or to exercise such absolute power? And what can we do about it? For answers today, we turn to one of America's leading presidential historians, Doug Brinkley, professor of history at Rice University, who's tracked all the presidents from 1 to 47. Doug Brinkley, good to talk to you again. Welcome back to the Bill Press Pod.
Glad to be back, Bill.
Doug, you've studied the presidency, everyone from 1 to 47. Let me just ask you, it's only been 8 months now, a little over, but is it safe to say that no president has ever pushed the boundaries of presidential power like Donald Trump has?
Oh, that it goes without saying that's true. One can talk about having a more difficult 8 months. Abraham Lincoln
Mm-hmm.
coming in in his first 6 months, where the Civil War begins, Fort Sumner and the Confederate flag, and the Southern states forming the Confederacy. That would be a much more arduous moment because of our country dividing in two. But from the vantage point of presidential hubris and bullying and desecrating norms, all in advancement of, under the term, I have exceedingly wide presidential powers. We've never seen anything like this.
Well, he's defined the presidency, hasn't he, or redefined the presidency as one of absolute power.
The strange part of Trump 2.0 is that he is convinced Republicans that they won a mandate election. In truth, they barely won. And when FDR would win big in 1932 and 1936, he had a real mandate. And even in that situation, after FDR won in 36 and early 1937, he felt flummoxed by the Supreme Court, who was knocking down some New Deal measures. And FDR tried to famously expand the court or pack the court from 9 to 15. And it went nowhere because Democrats told FDR, knock it off. That's not happening. We won't back it. What's been frightening, really, in this Trump term is just the way every single Republican, with exception of occasionally Murkowski or Rand Paul deviating on an issue here or there, but it's just been rubber stamp city. All Trump, anything Trump does, they bow down and worship to. And that's a big difference. Not only is Trump pretending it was a mandate election, but he's able to frighten fellow Republicans and to stay in lockstep with him, and add to the point that it's the most very conservative Supreme Court, with three of them appointed by Trump. And we feel this is a moment where the right is running a revolution. They feel that this is time for them to destroy our regulatory society and particularly allow oil and gas extraction industries and the rest to go unregulated and to start mining and chopping forests down willy-nilly in the public lands, and do it in such a steamrolling fashion that there's really not time to resist except to be sued and go to court. And that's what we're seeing happening with virtually all of President Trump's executive orders. They get taken up by the courts.
But I was taught in school and grew up believing, Professor, that there were certain limits to power, right? There was a separation of powers. There were limits so that the president was not absolute was not a dictatorship. Are there any? Are there really? Have we learned? Are there none, or are there any guardrails at all?
When the at time of the Constitution, we really didn't define a president to behave the way Trump is right now. In fact, presidents didn't have that much power. George Washington issued one executive order on neutrality for us to avoid wars and trade with everybody. Beyond that, there weren't many meaningful executive orders given up until the Civil War, when late in the game, Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, which some people for shorthand will call Executive Order Number One. It's not till the 20th century that we see these presidents and the executive really circumventing hostile Congress, usually to get something done by doing an executive order. It's always better to go through Congress, who has the purse
Hmm.
strings of the nation, and you will make anything more permanent by going the congressional route. But there are moments when we're seeing this increase of executive orders, and Theodore Roosevelt did quite a few. FDR did a lot. Things that we think about. The problem, Bill, with executive orders, take FDR, he did an executive order for the Manhattan Project to keep it secret, led to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, end of Vietnam. The other hand, FDR did an executive order for Japanese internment camps.
Mm.
It depends on an executive order of how you feel about things. What Trump has done that is different, he's weaponized the executive order on day one. I was in Washington working for CBS News at the time of this inaugural this year in January, and the one that it was cold, and so it was held indoors, rightfully,
Right.
but no reason to freeze. And it was Trumpian for sure, but it was felt with you felt the parameter of an inaugural. But that was first part of the day. He went immediately over to the arena and sat on stage with Vegas lights and loud
Hmm.
music, and he sat on a chair just signing that huge Donald J. Trump signature for executive orders, and the first one being to call January 6th not an insurrection and to empty the prisons of any of the people that had raided the U.S. Capitol. And from that moment on, the last 6 months, it's been every day with television cameras and executive order after another executive order nonstop. While we're talking, there's probably an executive
Yeah.
order being
Right.
signed.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But as you point out, the Republicans in Congress, both the House and the Senate, basically have just rolled over. They support, if not take advantage of and delight in actions that Donald Trump has taken, which if any Democrat did, right, they'd impeach him right away on the
Absolutely.
spot, right?
Take a look. I mentioned what happened with FDR and how in the Supreme
Democrats.
Court and
Hmm.
how Democrats said to FDR, his own party, no. We recall during the dark days of Watergate, as well as anybody, Bill, it was suddenly, Republican senators ranging from Howard
Hmm.
Baker to Barry
Right.
Goldwater told Nixon, enough. No, we're not lying for you. We don't have that now. We saw what happened to Mitt Romney and Lynn Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and some that were willing to stand up to
Hmm.
Trump. They put the kind of MAGA hit on them. And so this is a president with an authoritarian bent who is able to keep his party organized by fear of Truth Social, or we said the first term of Trump by tweet. They are terrified that the president will say something or give them an ugly nickname. And they shut down. It's just one example going on right now where you're not allowed, if you're Republican, to say a word, or opening up of the Epstein files. There are only a few Republicans have shown courage on that front when Trump himself had promised he would open them. And it's on and on this. It's just a lockstep Republican Party. When that cracks, that's when Donald Trump will crack, because his power now is the stronghold he has over the GOP on Capitol Hill.
As you have mentioned, so the Congress has basically folded. The Supreme Court is recently really has become Donald Trump's enabler, I think, in so many ways. But what about the American people, Doug? That's what it concerns me and puzzles me. Why aren't the American people, do they don't know what's going on or don't care?
People don't know and don't care because
Hmm.
we haven't taught civics or government. The idea of public service has fallen by the wayside. If you don't start young and understanding what's at stake in a democracy, what is liberty, what really is U.S. history, you're in trouble. Add to that social media and everybody getting their own information or misinformation. And then we're a leisure class society in many ways, meaning people are just want to do their job and have my downtime and don't feel like getting engaged in political theater in any meaningful way. But also, Trump's been a beneficiary of Democratic overreach on Me Too movement, defund the police, Black Lives Matter, which were all these social movements that they got too far, and they got far on the same time of COVID. And do not underestimate the anger across America of people that had to be locked up, shut down
Yeah.
for a year,
Huh.
2 years. And they're really just angry at Washington, period. And Trump has remained the avenger in that front.
Do you fear a constitutional crisis that, let's say, may be unimaginable, but the Supreme Court may rule that no, Donald Trump, you do not have immunity for anything you do as president, right? Or no, Donald Trump, you can't fire all these people, or no, you can't send a National Guard anywhere you want, and that Donald Trump would refuse to obey a court order?
I could easily see that happening, but we're also running whatever the Supreme Court is and who's in it. They're recognizing that we're now running a pretty fast clock for a year from now for midterm elections, and the solution will be coming at the ballot box. The danger, as I see it, if is gerrymandering, but also voter intimidation. If you start placing National Guard on the idea you need safety in let's say Wisconsin, and so in Milwaukee, you're putting all these troops around. That's going to keep a lot of urban voters from coming out. Look at the places where Donald Trump is sending National Guard and
Mm.
intimating U.S. soldiers are in cities, and that's the stronghold of the Democrats. And if you can do voter intimidation in cities and bring down certain congressional votes in the city suburbs, you could start creating a map and knowing where you need to win, and then try to militarize or have open up less polling places in particular counties to give an edge to the Republicans. So how do we run a free and fair election in a year without the White House in the GOP, I should say, using their assets to disenfranchise or discourage voters?
I must tell you, that is the fear that I hear more often from listeners and friends than anything else. That while we may have some hope for the midterms in terms of the House and the Senate, there are many people who fear we won't have any midterms. Donald Trump will declare a national emergency and either cancel the midterms or, as you suggest, just put some limits in certain key areas, right, to depress the vote.
Depress the vote at key places. And that's
Yeah.
what the Democratic Party has to be aware
Wow.
of. And this will get clearer, say, by next March coming up, where those areas are. And I would not put it past President Trump that he will manufacture a crisis in that particular area. People aren't going to, there's already public voting apathy, but if people are hearing reports that National Guard had brought in at three places because of violence, it just where people stay home,
Yeah.
and they'll be able to, due to algorithms and polling and wizards or experts on this, determine pockets of America that they can do this with that would give them just enough to hold on to Congress. Now, if the economy goes badly, which I pray it doesn't, I always want a great, healthy American economy, but if it went badly, they may not have enough powder to do that kind of strategy, meaning there might be a people's movement saying we're going to punish the Republicans and Trump. But I would not put that when you study the history of the South and you see what was done with polling, I mean, with voter disenfranchisement through the whole civil rights movement and before, and how to keep black vote down. And I live here in Texas, and say Harris County, the huge county, Houston. It's easy to not open enough polling places, to
Yeah.
make the lines really long, to suddenly have an issue at that site, to and if somebody wants to strategize that kind of anti-voting strategy to benefit the president, I would not be surprised if that's not tried and potentially implemented.
Wow. Boy, that is pretty scary. And I think people, so what's saying
It's
is,
called wake up right now, everybody. Wake
yeah,
up.
wake up. Exactly. That people's fears about what might happen during the midterms are real and could very well happen.
Yeah, and yet I don't think President Trump could cancel midterms. I do not think he would dare try that
Yeah.
or would be allowed
Hmm.
to get away with that. So I think you have to look more at a nefarious political strategy map of how they might pull that off.
Yeah. Maybe at that point, the Supreme Court may find some backbone.
Yeah, I think they would if Trump goes too far on this issue. But if they can localize it and find where they can pick up these congressional seats and then know that these are five places, remember, all they have to do is win by a couple, two,
Right.
and they maintain Congress.
Maintain the right House and the Senate. Doug, I want to take a quick break here. We have to take a quick break here on the Bill Press Pod. When we come back, I want to ask you about some of the examples of the way I believe that Donald Trump has pushed or maybe abused his power as presidency. Hold on just a second. We'll be right back. And we're back on today's podcast. Delighted to welcome back to the Bill Press Pod Professor Douglas Brinkley. He's a presidential historian, professor of history at Rice University. He is the Catherine Sonoff Brown Chair in Humanities at Rice and a best-selling author of many books. My favorite, Doug, I must tell you, is the one about Teddy Roosevelt and the environment, The Wilderness Warrior. Great book. And I know you are an environmental crusader as well as a presidential historian. So we've talked about Donald Trump and pushing the boundaries of the presidency. One example you cited earlier, which we're going through right this week, Doug, is sending the National Guard right into American cities that he deems to be in trouble and needing the military to enforce law and order in those cities. And we just saw it over the weekend where the president wanted to send Oregon National Guard troops into Portland, Oregon. A judge there said, no, you can't do that. So the president went around the ruling and dispatched California National Guard troops to Portland, where the judge came back again and said, no, you can't do that either. And then he wanted to send National Guards and then the judge said, no, you can't send National Guard here from any state in the Union. So instead, he sent the National Guard to Chicago. Is he operating on any authority whatsoever, legal authority?
No, President Trump's winging it. He likes to see a visual of somebody homeless, somebody protesting in our urban areas, and use that as a pretext for bringing in either armed forces or National Guard or anything to get the visual effect is that he's claiming back a city. I think he felt his experiment in Washington, D.C. was successful, and that's because it got fairly decent write-ups, and the mayor joined forces with him, and it's a federal city, and there were things he could do there that are unlike going into other states. But I recall vividly, I wrote a book called The Great Deluge on Hurricane Katrina,
Yeah.
and one of the things that George W. Bush did wrong is they were so short of troops to send to the Iraq war that they pulled Louisiana National Guard to go fight in Iraq. So while we needed the Guard in Louisiana during Katrina, they were in the Middle East. And I'm seeing now in Portland, it's just utterly ridiculous to think about. There's nothing going on there. There's one building where a few people are
Protesters.
standing. And in Chicago, you have Governor Pritzker. Please stop doing this. He's pleading with the president And Trump wants to score political points on Pritzker because he thinks he's a up and coming star of the Democratic Party and wants to demonize Chicago because it's where John Podesta and Rahm Emanuel and Barack Obama and David Axelrod and on are all from. And he's just going to keep doing this because it's a page from Nixon. He wants to show I'm the hyper super almost Superman of law and order, and I'm going to go after all you dissenters and protesters, and we will squash you. Meanwhile, people don't sign up for the National Guard to be used like this. You join it to protect your state, and once in a while, a president calls you in to help in a situation. But to me, this is a abuse of how the National Guard should be used.
Yeah, which leads to his threat, if you will, or promise last week in Quantico, Virginia, when he told the assembled generals and admirals that he believes that American cities should be used as the training grounds for the military.
That's right. And that to me is scary. When you hear language like, say, dictator, that's not an American president. And imagine the horror that's in the hearts of all of our men and women in the armed forces who have been trained to know better, that you don't put American on American, that it's not the job. Now, you can have times where you call in the Air Force for a task or
Yeah.
the 101, but what Trump was suggesting is a militarization, the Army being at his disposal to basically play police and arrest American citizens. It's an outrage.
Mhm.
And there's always with President Trump a bridge too far that's too far from the bridge that's already 5 times too far. And that's what we're dealing with when he's talking about the militarization of our cities.
And we also saw another example last week, within the last 2 weeks. But last week, the president informed Congress officially that we are basically at war against drug cartels from Venezuela. And we have the authority. He has the authority. They're not attacking the United States, but he has the military authority to bomb these boats that he insists are filled with drugs that are heading directly to the United States. Again, does the president have that authority?
He does not have the authority to randomly pick vessels and blow them up at the high seas. Now, one appreciates him wanting to take on the drug lords. One appreciates the fact that Venezuela is not our friend. But in history, these kind of moments when a president does something like this, it can create massive problems. Just think about the Gulf of Tonkin incident
Yeah.
in 1964, where supposedly an American vessel was shot at, and then we went all in and did a vote, Lyndon Johnson, and only 2 U.S. senators, Ernest Gruning of Alaska and Wayne Morris of Oregon, dissented, and Johnson used this event to ram through war powers, which really gave us the Vietnam War in a big time way. So we got to be careful on these international events. Now, I'm hoping that these are like a warning flare, a one-offer that was done on that. But if it's a continual policy, somebody will strike back at us, and that can trigger events that are unforeseeable. I just this semester teaching World War One and the assassination of Ferdinand, and how one event suddenly can spiral out of control. And we don't want a world where every country is just firing at boats in the seas, where it creates a system of anarchy. But I think on this round, the American public will give President Trump a grace note because he's showing that I'm an ardent and strategic commander in chief. Like his first term, he struck at a chemical weapons facility one time, and then you're firing at a boat here, drug lords, one time. But if it continues to be just rote, then it could unspool in horrible ways that are unconstitutional and are going to turn the world against us.
And finally, the other example that the president keeps referring to, either as a big tease or as something he's really trying to engineer, is a third term. The Constitution, besides, Doug, no way he could pull that off, right?
No way he can. Just age alone,
Yeah.
a cognitive decline, physical decline. I am stunned at the amount of energy he has. I hear he's golfing every day while people are losing their paychecks in a shutdown. But I think you have to think of Trump now as the Trump organization, and he can choose who he wants to come after him. If he wants J.D. Vance, so be it. Let's look at what Eric Trump and Donald Jr. are up to. We should be realizing that Marco Rubio has been nothing but pure ambition from day one in politics. There may be some people like Youngkin of Virginia that thinks has ties to Wall Street in the corporate world, thinks maybe the window will be good for a different kind of Republican. I feel that unless Trump goes down in poll numbers or the Epstein files or something that comes and destroys him, he will be the kingmaker for who he can pick. And if it's Vance, Trump could be on the back, and he might tell Vance he has to pick Ivanka as VP. I think Trump will still owns the Republican Party for another generation.
Agree or disagree with him, you must, I think, admit that he has been a brilliant political strategist, right? Engineering his own first election and the second election. And my question is, do you see anybody of those people that you mentioned who would have the ability of Donald Trump to have a base that will support them no matter what they do? It's unbelievable.
It is. President Trump would be the first to tell you he learned from Joe McCarthy and the McCarthy story. He learned from Roy Cohn. He learned from Richard Nixon. He admired people like Haldeman and Ehrlichman. He thought Nixon made a mistake of quitting. Could have just burned the Watergate tapes and get it over with. He has a utter disdain for American media culture and journalism. And he's learned to never apologize and to
Roy Cohn,
always,
right?
Roy Cohn never apologized. If you get arrested with marijuana in your car and the police are looking at you holding it, just say, "What marijuana? That's not mine. I don't know what you're talking about." Just deny, never admit guilt. And he has a philosophy that he cobbled together. His father is part of it. And it's not built, it's built around gall and audacity and a warrior fighting spirit and never throw in the towel. It's early on when Trump went down the escalator and started saying that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. He talked about the people that were his heroes. I don't think he really knew much about them, but he liked Patton.
Yeah.
And because he saw the movie Patton, he liked the tough guy, just Patton and
Right.
MacArthur, and he never really cared for statesmanship or how to or be diplomatic. And then he's always wanted to make money, and he enriches himself on a regular basis. And he now has the world. It's the madman theory. Nobody in the world knows what Trump might do today or tomorrow. Hence, it gives him a certain power that only he knows, and only he can announce it on Truth Social. Everywhere is talking Trump. We're talking Trump. And it's been going on for about a decade now where we can't get away from him. And that's a kind of magic to be able to insert your celebrityhood on the body politique, not just in the United States, but the world for such a long period of time.
Yeah, and he has done it. Do you have any final question, Doug? Do you have any fears, knowing American history as well as you do, knowing the presidency as deeply as you do, that our democracy will survive Donald Trump?
I think we will survive. I'm an optimist on that front, qualified one, but just because I've seen our country go through perilous times before, I'm reminded that our own times, while odd and unprecedented, are not uniquely oppressive, and that we're seeing hits of things like DEI and women's rights, but also there's so many women in the workforce and professors and doctors, and look at the advancements the women's movement has made or Black America has made, but Trump's driven it backwards decades. And at the end, what's going on here is that the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, they're trying to undo the long 60s. They want to undo what Lyndon Johnson accomplished in the Great Society and some of what Nixon did with clean air and water and endangered species. They want to undo all that. They want to go back, undo everything up till John F. Kennedy, who was surprisingly a bit of a fiscal conservative. They don't mind the space program, although they're gutting NASA right now. And they don't mind Eisenhower's Interstate Highway Project, and then they'd love to chip away at a lot of FDR stuff. But the war going on here is to destroy all of the wins that progressives, Democrats, liberals made in the 60s and early 70s.
But you think we can survive and recover and rebuild?
I do, except I worry about these deep fakes and AI and the technological world order, and because that's a new layer to everything, all of our lives, when we don't know what we're watching even emanated from a real place.
Yeah. On that hopeful note that we will survive, Doug, we leave it at that. And thank
you.
That
Grateful Dead song, Bill, We Will Survive.
And thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's always great to catch up with you. And thank you for all your great work over the years. We'll talk to you again soon. Doug Brinkley.
Thank you.
And there we go. That's a wrap for today's podcast. A great big thank you to Doug Brinkley, a great historian, a great author. I love his work. Again, particularly like his book about Teddy Roosevelt and the birth of the environmental movement called The Wilderness Warrior. Doug Brinkley, professor of history at Rice University. Again, that's it for today, but we'll be back on Friday with our Reporters Roundtable. What a week this is. I'm sure going to be another wild week in Trump 2.0, dealing with the shutdown, and both sides seem to be no closer to resolving that shutdown. Most people seem ready to just live with it, but God knows for how long. We'll be watching the National Guard trying to get into Chicago. We'll see if Donald Trump tries to send them into any other American city with a Democratic mayor. And this week, the Nobel Peace Prize is going to be announced. Guess what? I think Donald Trump may be disappointed. Anyhow, whatever happens, all the political news of the week, we'll wrap it up with our Reporters Roundtable on Friday. So have a great week, everybody. Stay strong and come back and see us on Friday for our Reporters Roundtable, the next edition of the Bill Press Pod.